So we're very, very, very blessed tonight to have Professor Bernard McGinn giving us a small keynote. This is one of these typically long UChicago professor names. He's the Naomi Shenston Donnelly Professor Emeritus of Historical Theology and of the History of Christianity at the University of Chicago. He's a longtime friend of Calvert House, very, very longtime friend, prolific writer and researcher. His work is primarily, as you can tell from his professor title, in the history of Christianity and the history of Christian thought, especially the medieval period. And he's especially well known for his work on mysticism. He's published a very, very, very wonderful 7-volume thing on Christian mysticism in the West. So it's 9 books and 7 volumes. The collected history is called The Presence of God. It was a project over the course of many decades. I just heard that wait, was this you? So the people who call Professor McGinn's wife Grandma Pat, the daughter was recently assigned this book. This is a Hyde Park neighborhood story. So I was scouring reviews because I love seeing people say nice things about professors' work. One reviewer calls this work a magisterial work that is stunning in its sophisticated methodology and its close reading of texts, both historical in approach and profoundly theological in presupposition. These volumes constitute a classic work that will not soon be overtaken. So we're very lucky and blessed to have had him at the University of Chicago's Divinity School since 1969 and to have him with us tonight. So please join me in welcoming Professor Bernard McGinn.
Thank you very much, Emily. I want to thank Lauren and Father Andrew for making this invitation to me. And I want to welcome you all. It's so nice to see such a large group of supporters of Calvert House. My talk's not long, 15 minutes, I think. So you won't be suffering. I've wondered a bit about why I was asked to provide these brief remarks for the happy event of celebrating Calvert House. And I suppose it's because I've been attending Calvert House for 56 years, probably about half or more of its existence. If you live long enough, strange things happen, and this is one of them. I'm not here to give you a history of Calvert House, although I've profited much from some historical material that Lauren gave me, and all I want to do is to offer some reflections on Calvert House as I've seen it over 56 years, and also some observations on the role of Catholicism in the University of Chicago. I arrived at the University of Chicago in the fall quarter of 1969. One of the first 2 Catholic theologians to be asked to teach at the traditionally Protestant, originally Baptist, Divinity School. My colleague at that time was my old friend David Tracy, whom some of you may know died on Tuesday. David was, I think, the greatest American Catholic theologian of his generation. I really didn't know what to expect. I'm a native New Yorker, and I've always thought of the Midwest or anything west of the Hudson as kind of camping out. But I arrived and I found that I liked it. And I happen to still be here, for better or for worse. Father Tom McDonough was the Calvert chaplain in those days. And since I was still in active ministry, I went over to introduce myself and ask him if he needed any help, someone to sub for masses and things like that, and indeed he did. So for a year between the fall of 1969 and the spring of 1970, I sometimes said Mass at Calvert House. Tom McDonough was a wonderful man. He was genial, he was smart, he was very pastoral. But he was also very busy. During his time as chaplain, he had gone and gotten a degree at the University of Chicago Law School. And he became the lawyer for the Catholic bishops of the state of Illinois, and was often down in Springfield to do various kinds of things. So indeed, I did sub at various times. And I didn't realize until I was reading the history that getting to know Tom McDonough was actually a connection with the very beginnings of Calvert House. I'll say a little bit more about that afterwards. Now, there have always been Catholics at the University of Chicago from its foundation in 1892. But as far as I know, there's been no real history of the Catholic students at the university over the course of things. But as early as 1902, a Catholic club was formed for the purpose of welcoming Archbishop Spalding of Peoria, who had been invited to speak at the university. That club continued on, but eventually folded in 1922. Catholic students, however, were not left abandoned, because not only was St. Thomas the Apostle always a welcoming place for Catholic students and faculty, but there were people who began to try to organize the Catholic students on the campus. In 1923, a man named Jerome Kerwin became an associate professor of political science. Kerwin was a devout Catholic who petitioned Cardinal Mundelein to organize a Newman Club at the university. Mundelein would have nothing of it. Why should good Catholics go to the university, the atheist University of Chicago, and a lot of good Catholic universities in Chicago and in the area? Godless atheism was rampant in those days at the university. Kerwin, however, did receive encouragement from some other Dawson officials, and so Catholic students began to band together under his leadership. 1924, some of you may well know, saw the establishment of the Catholic intellectual journal Commonweal, and study clubs of readers of that journal started to spring up around the country. These people called themselves Calvert Catholics. Calvert Catholics and Calvert Clubs, after Cecil Calvert, Lord Baltimore, who founded the first English Catholic colony. And one of these clubs was established at the University of Chicago in 1924, and it continued on despite many vicissitudes. The arrival of President Robert Hutchins and his Great Books program, in which the Catholic tradition had a significant role, did much to give Catholicism an intellectual respectability that it had previously lacked on many non-Catholic campuses. I think it was around this time, or maybe a few years afterwards, that the well-known description of the University of Chicago was first bruited about. Chicago was a place where atheist professors taught Thomism to Jewish students. I'm sure many of you have heard that. I think it's still alive. Well, Cardinal Mundelein died in late 1939. In 1940, his successor, Samuel Stritch, the Archbishop of Milwaukee, arrived. The indefatigable Kerwin immediately met with him and petitioned the new Archbishop to appoint a chaplain for what we call the Calvert Catholics at the university. There was still some opposition, but on October 21, 1941, Stritch appointed Father Joseph Connerton, who at that time was assistant pastor at St. Thomas, as the first chaplain at the Calvert House. Calvert Club, now the Calvert House. In 1942, the Archdiocese bought the house at 5735 that you all know so well. Father Connerton was the official chaplain from 1941 to 1961. And I believe it was in 1942 that he received an assistant. And that assistant was none other than the young Father Thomas McDonough, who eventually succeeded him as chaplain for the period 1961 to 1970. So my friendship with Tom McDonough actually was a connection with the very beginnings of Calvert House. Now, I can't give you an account of all the various chaplains who've guided Calvert House since 1970, but I just want to note one or two important milestones. Tom McDonough was succeeded by Father Rollins Lambert, who in 1949 was the first black Catholic ordained for the Archdiocese of Chicago. He was chaplain from 1971 to 1975. I remember him well, especially for his activities in introducing the reforms of Vatican II into the community. He eventually left to work for the U.S. Catholic Conference in Washington. Now, Rollins was not the only African-American chaplain, because some of you may remember that Father Ed Braxton, future Bishop of Belleville in southern Illinois, was a chaplain in the 1980s. We're moving ahead gradually. Another active chaplain, especially for his outreach to undergraduate students, was Father Willard or Bill J. Bush, who was a chaplain in the 1990s. Now, the list goes on, including Father Lagus from the 2000s, but, as I said, my remarks can't be a full history. I did promise you just a few remarks on how I've seen the presence of Catholics at the university in the time since I've been here. From my perspective, the role of Vatican II was providential and pivotal. As befits the Council's outreach to the wider world, the university became more open to Catholic intellectual currents since about the 1960s, middle 1960s. The Lutheran Dean of the Divinity School, Gerald Brower, was an observer at the Council, as were faculty members, the recently deceased Martin Marty, and also Langdon Gilkey. At Jerry Brower's invitation, Cardinal Sunens, one of the leaders of the Council, spoke in Rockefeller Chapel to an overflow audience. I think it was around 1966, it was before I came, 1966. Catholics began to flock to the Divinity School from the middle 1960s, despite the opposition of Cardinal Cody, whose views about the university were similar to Cardinal Mundeleин's, that is, godless atheism. So, despite all of this, the largest group of students in the Divinity School, by the late 1960s were actually Catholic students. And at that time, the faculty decided, we needed to get some Catholic faculty as well. And that's how David Tracy and I wound up at the university in 1969. Since then, there have been many Catholic faculty, far too many to mention here. A major mark of the university's new openness to religion and to Catholicism was the month-long celebration of the medieval heritage, which was held during the month of November in 1974. Now, as good Catholics, you all remember that 1974 marked the 700th anniversary, that's close, of the deaths of Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure. Early in that year, I sent a letter to the then Dean Joseph Kitagawa suggesting that we might think of doing something for this anniversary. But I never suspected that he would seize on this idea and then convince President Edward Levy and other powers that be to organize a university-wide series of events over a whole month. Lectures, gatherings, cultural events, library exhibits, etc., etc. You name it, and we had it. And, of course, there was much else, including the bestowal of honorary degrees on the two premier Catholic theologians of that day, Karl Rahner and Bernard Larnagan, who was actually the teacher of both myself and David Tracy. During this conference, Cardinal Franz Koenig of Vienna, another of the heroes of the council, spoke to an overflow crowd, again, in Rockefeller Chapel. As far as I know, that was the only time that Cardinal Cody ever came to the university and managed to show his face. Another cardinal was there, so he had to come. Another featured speaker was Dom Helder Camara, Bishop Helder Camara, one of the heroes, of course, early heroes of liberation theology. And this celebration gained widespread attention, articles in Newsweek, Time magazine, etc. Now, 1974 for most of you is a long time ago. Not for me. Much has happened since then at the university and in the Catholic community. In the mid-1980s, when the American bishops issued an important letter questioning the morality of nuclear weapons, Cardinal Joseph Bernardin, who had been one of the authors of that document, came to the university for a day-long conference and gave another speech at Rockefeller Chapel with hundreds and hundreds of people attending. Let me just mention one other important development, the foundation of the Lumen Christi Institute. Lumen Christi, as you know, is not an official part of the university, but has been of great significance for the Catholics at Chicago and for the Calvert community. Many of you may not know that Lumen Christi started at Calvert House. In the mid-1990s, the then chaplain, Bill J. Bush, floated the idea to some faculty members that maybe we should form a Catholic Studies program at the university. I told him I didn't think this was a good idea. It would never work. It would never work at the university. But that perhaps some kind of independent center or institute dedicated to Catholic studies that would bring noted speakers to the university would be possible and helpful. And there were other faculty members who gave similar advice. David Tracy and Jean-Luc Marion and the same. So with strong support from Cardinal George, the rest is history. The actual foundation of Calvert of Lumen Christi in 1997 and down to the present has shown that Calvert House and Lumen Christi have always worked together and done much for the Catholic presence of the university, as well as for the wider Catholic intellectual world. I'll close with a final paragraph. Calvert House is a multifaceted community, as reflects its location at the University of Chicago. It is, of course, an intellectual community, as fits the nature of the U of C. In my 34 years of teaching at the Divinity School, whenever I met with incoming students, I would say to them, you will enjoy and flourish at the university if you like to learn, if you like to study, if you like to exchange ideas. If you don't, go home. I think this intellectual character is evident also in the Calvert community, at least as far as I've experienced it. But the Calvert community is more than just intellectual. It's also a community of faithful Catholics who wish to share the good news with each other and also, insofar as possible, with the wider church. Calvert has always been distinguished for its wider outreach to the church and the community through a variety of ministries. Now, the university is indeed a secular place, and devout Catholics can sometimes find it at best indifferent to their concerns. This is why it's so vital, in my mind, to have a place like Calvert House, where Catholics can meet, discuss, form friendships, receive the spiritual counsel that they need. Finally, Calvert House is above all a worshiping community. For sincere Catholics, the Mass is the center to their lives. Whether they attend only on Sundays or as many of the Calvert community do, often during the week. So for all these reasons, as well as many others I can't mention here, I think it's imperative that Calvert House continue to flourish at the University of Chicago. In this holy year dedicated to hope, I'm here to express my hope for the future of Calvert House, a hope that I'm sure you all share. Now, the Archdiocese of Chicago has been generous to Calvert House over the years, but as we all know, diocesan funds are increasingly under strain these days. So I'll end by saying that it's time for the graduates, friends of Calvert House, to step up in any way they can to sustain this vital ministry. So, thank you.